I'm Jill Conrath, sales lover, sales nerd, sales author, and sales speaker, and I am here today for the third in our series of engaging sales presentations. And I'm really excited about this one because we are going to talk about something that really is important to me. I mean, the thing I hate the most in the whole wide world is when you have an opportunity and you blow it. And so we're going to make sure that you don't do that today because we're talking to somebody who's really smart about this. We've already talked about how to create a really good sales presentation, but now we're going to talk about how to have a really good conversation with that sales presentation. And I am introducing to you Julie Hansen. So say hi, Julie.
Hi.
You're supposed to say hi, Julie. Let me tell you a little bit about Julie. I first met her a few years ago, and she had written a book called Act Like a Sales Pro, and it was really good. I was excited to meet her, a big fan. And then just this last year or so, she came out with a second book called, and you can hold this one up now, Julie, called Sales Presentation for Dummies. And literally, it is the guide for everything you need to know about how to create and how to deliver an effective sales presentation. So that's why I'm excited to have her here today.
Well, but thank you.
You're welcome. But, yeah, well, that's not all, though. I got to tell people that you are also an actor, and you have been in sales yourself for like over 20 years, and your highlight of your acting career was when you?
I had a small role on Sex and the City.
Okay. So, I mean, not many people.
A G-rated episode, I want to stress.
Okay, G-rated. Well, you don't have to stress that for today's purposes. I think everybody who's listening can handle something a little G-rated or something too, Julie. So we're going to take a look at presentations and how to make them engaging and have a conversational presentation. That's a term that you use a lot. Would you define the difference between a conversational presentation and what most people do, like a regular presentation?
Sure. It's, the regular presentation is that traditional presentation style where we have a passive audience. We go in and we present our slides and we go through them in kind of a linear fashion, and it's more of a monologue, right? Maybe there's questions, in between, but typically salespeople will wait and they'll have, they'll put up the slide with the question mark and say, well, any questions? And the prospect, who is by 45 minutes probably asleep, says, oh, they perk up and no, not really. So that is the more traditional model, and a conversational presentation really breaks that mold. It really invites the customer in and it gives them a part in it. So it is more in line with how we communicate today. So it's more of a two-way dialogue. We certainly have a goal, we have objectives, we have things we want to cover, but we leave room for the customer, the client, to interact with us. Because we know that the more a prospect interacts, the more engaged they are, the more likely we are to form a connection with them, the more they are likely to remember the experience.
Okay, so you're saying that if we do the conversational presentation, they're more likely to be engaged, meaning
Makes
they're
sense,
interested in it.
Absolutely.
And what else? More engaged, they build a relationship.
More engaged, more interested, they're more attentive. Those are all things you need to get someone to the point where they're interested in buying your product or service, right?
Right.
They're not going to buy if they're not interested. They're not going to buy if they're not paying attention. People can't buy from you if they're not listening to what you have to say, or they can't remember what you said.
Right. And I think today, one of the things that I see out there is that people, if you don't stand out as a salesperson and can make that connection and show yourself as a valuable resource and have a conversation with people, they really don't want to do business with you so much as just evaluate what you're doing and shove you to the side and look at the next thing. But if you're doing that engagement, they're more likely to want to work with you versus your competitors.
Absolutely. There are so many choices people have today, and not just within our particular niche that we're selling, but just the multiple things coming at everybody. We choose very quickly who we want to pay attention to, who we want to spend time with, and fair or not, that happens rather quickly in a conversation.
Yeah, well, boring is not good. So our goal today is to teach people how not to be boring. We're going to try to not be boring as we do that.
Exactly.
Okay, next question for you. Sales presentation. What is the objective in your mind of a sales presentation?
That's a very good question, because a lot of times salespeople forget that it's the objective is not just to get the presentation and show up, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that their objective is to go through every slide. I mean, that would be the, you know, that I did the presentation.
I delivered the information. Now
Yes.
Your part is to give me the contract.
Yes.
If only it were that simple.
Yeah.
No, it's, you know, the objective is, it needs to be something that moves the sale along. And that can be different based on where you are in the sales process with this particular customer. It could be to do a deeper dive. It could be to bring more people into the next presentation, bring more decision makers in. It could be a demo. It just depends where you are in the sales cycle. If your presentation is at the end of the sales cycle, maybe a contract is the next step.
Yeah.
But it needs to be whatever that next step is. Sometimes salespeople get so focused on, you know, kind of the very end result that we try and push it too quickly with buyers, and they resist because that's not how they move.
I think a lot of people try to really cover everything that needs to be covered, thinking that the more we give people at the onset, the easier it will be for them to make a decision. And then they leave themselves no room for having further conversations because they've covered the whole shebang. You know, there's nothing left.
Right. It's almost like, you know, it's an appetizer rather than an entire meal. You know, you're trying to get them enticed. You can't possibly cover your entire solution in 40 minutes, you know, unless you're really racing through it and you got a very simple solution.
Well, that's really good to race through. And then we've completed our mission. We've covered every slide there was in that deck, and you know, we're done, right?
Yeah, it's a blur. Yeah, they remember nothing. Right.
Nothing, right. Okay, let's talk about this deck, because a lot of people get handed decks from their marketing department. And so, you know, they're told that you have the ability to, you know, massage them a little. You know, what do you do? What do you suggest? I know you train a lot of salespeople on this all the time. What do you suggest people do when they're given the deck from marketing and told, go get them, you know?
Well, first of all, remember that those are very general, and they are typically created from that standpoint of just put everything in there just in case something triggers some interest. So right away, you need to have a very critical eye towards that question. Like, what is the one thing you want your customer to walk away with? What do you want them to remember? What is your message? What question are you addressing? And that will dictate what you put in your presentation. For instance, you're going to have a very different presentation if in that question's mind, you're addressing whether they even need the solution,
right,
versus whether they need the solution now, or whether a competitor is better.
Right.
So that is the starting point. And if you don't know that, you really are sort of whistling in the dark and just guessing and putting things together and playing with building blocks with no sense of how this needs to unfold.
So your first step then that you recommend when you do your training, your speaking, is that they really go through the deck and they say to yourself, where am I in this process? Where's my buyer in this process? I mean,
right.
have I just piqued their curiosity? Have I gotten them to decide that changing is good? I mean, and really focus on what you want. And then I know when we talked earlier, you mentioned the term conversational chunks. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very important, because that's very different from a traditional presentation where we've got a long 45-minute chunk or hour chunk, and which is not, by the way, how people pay attention today. So a conversational presentation breaks those topics down into smaller bite-sized chunks that are more in tune with and aligned with how we pay attention. So if you think about how we take our content today, we are very much in control of how we communicate. We tweet, we have these short texts or Instagrams or email messages, and it's just different now to go in and expect someone to listen for 45 minutes. It's just we think, oh my God, this is almost painful, right?
Oh, 45 minutes is a long time.
Right, it's a very long time, but that's how a lot of people are still presenting in that mode. So if you break things down, especially if you want to have a conversation, you can't do that. You need to break them down into 2-3 minute chunks to think about what are the key messages I need to get out about this particular topic or subtopic, and create a small chunk around that, and then understand that that is just the again, the appetizer, and that will allow the customer then to respond to that. So don't throw everything you know at a person about this particular subtopic. What are those key elements you need to get across? And start to create those little chunks. And what you're doing is you're kind of training yourself as well to remember that in between those chunks is where you're going to have a conversation.
Right. So just in general, if I would say, like, I do sales training, and I could say, oh, shoot, I could do all sorts of sales training in all sorts of areas, but you're saying break it down into strategies to get into the account, break it down into how to build value, break it down into how to compete against others who are like you. And those would be the chunks, and only focus then on the chunk that makes sense, and take those chunks and break them into sub chunks.
Right. Just make sure you're not talking for more than 5 minutes at a stretch.
Okay.
What you want to
do.
So
that's the point. The point is,
go ahead.
The point is to break it down into things that you'll only talk a little bit about, and then you'll bring people into the conversation.
Yes, and then hopefully you probably have more that you can say about that topic, obviously, but you want to allow them the opportunity to say, give you their thoughts on that, or understand, get a better feel whether that's really of interest to them. So that's the benefit of making it more conversational, having these smaller chunks. The worst presentation is one where you've talked for 45 minutes and they go, you know what, that isn't really relevant for us. Oh yeah. Or this has changed, or that you want to be able to pivot in the moment, and that's the beauty of making it more
creating the different chunks. So another thing that you said in terms of meeting prep is that you should stop and anticipate the questions that you'll be asked, probably within each of these chunks, right?
Right. Yes, it's, a lot of times people think, well, it's a conversation, so I don't have to plan as much because we're just going to talk, and I know my topic, and I'm pretty clear what people are going to ask. But you almost have to put aside what you know and think about each customer as it's a brand new experience for them.
Yeah.
So what might this customer, based on what they know or don't know, what might they ask? And be somewhat prepared to address that. If it's something that is going to take you way off track, then you need to have some means of bringing things back to where you want to go.
So part of your prep is to even plan if they go off that way and you're going, whoa, that's not really we don't even solve that problem. How to plan bringing people back.
Right. Because
even know what you're going to say.
Pardon me?
Even knowing what you're going to say ahead of time.
Absolutely. Because I think we I don't know why this is, but we assume that we're going to be much better at improvising on the spot than we usually are.
Yeah, I know.
And and it's very hard because you're in this situation. You've got, somebody you're trying to get a message across to. You're trying to engage. You're trying to manage your time.
A lot.
And you're trying to come up with brilliant questions. Why do that to yourself? I think what is a question? A question that they might ask.
Right.
And B, what's a question that I can ask that will draw them into this, maybe lead to a different exploration of this particular topic, or lead into the next topic.
Right. And people don't think of the questions. They just sit with the deck and they go with the deck. But the questions to me are what create the engagement, either prepping for what questions they might ask or having your own questions to engage them in the conversation.
Right. And if you don't take the time to think about those questions, what happens a lot of times is people tend to ask the same types of questions, very, very dull questions. Right. Yeah. So what's keeping you up at night, or, something, horrible questions, or does that make sense? Does that make sense? We tend to ask these repetitive check-in questions that
it's more like they're seeking approval when you ask, does that make sense? Does that make sense?
Right. And it feels like engagement, but it's really not. It's not. It's just checking in, and it's also a little bit insulting to keep asking someone if it makes sense. Right?
Yeah, it's like, does it make sense, stupid?
Right. Exactly.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
We don't want to ask that all the time. Now, what other things do you think are important to, think about while you're doing the presentation or before you're actually doing the presentation?
well, we talked about questions and certainly those, different types of questions. Also, those transition questions. How are you going to move things forward? Because you really have to manage your time. What happens in a conversation is we tend to lose track of time, right?
Yeah.
And by knowing that you've got these couple of minute chunks, that can help you gauge it a little bit. But then you got to understand, like, the customer's going to talk and then you're going to answer, and things can get, start to really draw out. So how are you going to manage your time? So you need to think about those transition questions or statements that can help you get back to, answering the essential question that you're there to answer for that customer, and managing those questions well.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because I have seen more presentations get out of hand where somebody will go, oh God, we've only got 5 minutes left and I've got 32 slides left to cover, flip, 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 as they try to.
That was not important, right?
Yeah. And then people feel like they're getting cheated because you haven't managed the time well.
Right. So it really is on you as the salesperson to do that. And I know that there's a little bit of, we're a little conflicted on that, because we're trying to have a conversation and we want them to participate, and we want to let them feel like they're driving it to some extent. But we know where we need to go, and we know that we should know that this customer needs to know that this is not important. This they don't need to know now. You are kind of the knowledgeable one, so you need to own that and manage that, and not just let them run you around. Right. That's not a good presentation.
What you just said is really important too. What do they need to know now? What do they need to know now is something. There's this whole spectrum of everything they could possibly need to know. What do they need to know at this stage of their buying process themselves? They don't need to know how the whole implementation rolls out. They don't need to know how it fits in with their existing system. Yet they might just need to know if it makes sense to even consider changing.
Exactly. And that goes back to why are you having this presentation? Why are you having this conversation? And if you don't have a good, focused question that you're addressing, you are going to be all over the place. You're going to go into informing mode, and I can tell you this, and we can do that. And, like you said at the beginning, more is not better today. Right. It confuses people. It gets things off track. They walk away and they don't know what they've just seen. There's so many different messages. So,
you just said about controlling the conversation. And I think about different presentations that I've seen where a prospective customer has started asking questions like, oh, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. And as a seller, you get like really sucked in because you go, oh, they're so interested. They're so interested. But at the end, it never moves. And so it's like, we need to know again, what is important for them to know now versus later. What do we have?
Yes.
Again, we can get sucked in and totally blow it and think we're doing the right thing.
Right. That's such a trap. So a couple things to keep in mind are really listen to that question, because when people ask things like, can I do this? How, that's not necessarily a question that needs you to go into great detail. That is a yes or no question. So many times salespeople just offer up so much more information than is necessary, right? Yeah. And watch for those questions that are more along the lines of teaching people how to use your product or solution, as opposed to letting them know how it's going to change their life, their business, right? Because you're not in a teaching mode. You're in a selling mode. And they don't need to know how to use your product at the end of the day. That's not the goal of the presentation. You don't need them to walk out and go, yeah, I can do that. I know how to use that particular solution. That's not the goal.
One of the things that you just said, if people say, can it do this? Or, can you handle it that way? Sometimes the answer to that question is, what are you hoping to accomplish when you ask that question? It's just another question, because they might be thinking of something that's really vital for you to know, and just a simple yes or no wouldn't do it. So sometimes just questioning back is helpful too.
Right. So just using good questioning and answering techniques is really vital to make sure you're answering the right question, like you said.
That's important too. So,
Yes.
okay, let's talk about afterwards. You've advanced it hopefully to the next step, and the next step being the next logical thing that you went into the meeting hoping to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
The presentation is done. And we can, yes. And your boss says, how did it go? And you said, oh, they loved us. No, you say that that's not sufficient, right?
Not necessarily. It could be, but really the test is, did you move the sale forward? Did you move it to the next logical step? Or did you just feel great about it and you felt like you had a great conversation, connected? That's not enough. You know, we're not in sales just to have nice conversations, at least, you know, ultimately.
Be friends, just be friends. Yeah.
Right. So if you haven't moved it forward, if you don't have some kind of, agenda to move it forward, then you have just had a nice conversation, and that's great. And maybe it'll turn into something, maybe it won't, but those are odds that I wouldn't bet on.
Yeah.
Because too many sales today they end up going to no decision, or, you know, they just stall and sit there. And so anything you can do to move things forward is really important.
Yeah. I always found it helpful too to look at where I ran into trouble in a presentation. And to say, you know, did they ask me any questions that I really stumbled over? Did it take a direction that I didn't want it to go? And the other thing I thought personally was helpful was to say, what did I do right? What did I say? And their eyes just kind of lit up, and they leaned forward and they go, oh my God. And it's like, you have to remember that kind of stuff too.
Absolutely. It's, you know, you have to do your own little evaluation afterwards, and, you know, kind of, you know, take yourself out of the presenter's seat, and as an observer think, well, how did that work? What went well? What do I need to maybe improve upon? So each time you're learning more. I mean, each time is different because it's a different client, but there are some things that you can learn and use the next time, or not use the next time, for sure.
Well, Julie Hansen, thank you so much for sharing your insights today. I've truly appreciated it. I think you've given us all some really, really good advice. I appreciate everything you've said. And I want to tell everybody else who's listening in right now that we are coming back with another number 4 in this series really soon. So you stay tuned so you can listen more about how to engage those prospects in a conversation, and then find out in our 5th and 6th series then how to use sales analytics. But this is about presentations. Julie Hansen, thanks one last time.
Oh, thank you, Jill. My pleasure.